What remains undeniable is the silence that followed. A voice that once filled rooms with ache and beauty was gone, leaving only echoes, only questions. Amy's story had no neat resolution, no happy ending. It was a story of brilliance and destruction intertwined. A story that still haunts anyone who dares to listen closely. And as the curtain fell on her short, turbulent life, one truth lingered above all. Amy Winehouse gave everything she had to her music, even when it consumed her. The mystery is not just why she died, but how she lived and why her songs still feel like confessions whispered from the other side. Part 1 ends here. The stage is dark. The audience waits. And the question hangs in the air. Was Amy's fate sealed the moment she opened her mouth to sing? Or was she simply the latest star caught in a curse that refuses to die? The death of Amy Winehouse did not end on the quiet streets of Camden. It began there. What followed was an echo, a wave of grief and speculation that spread across continents, shaking fans, baffling journalists, and cementing Amy's place in a pantheon no artist wishes to join. The morning of July 23, 2011, her home became a shrine. Strangers gathered outside the small townhouse, arms full of flowers, candles, letters. They wrote notes on cardboard scraps, on torn sheets of paper, on anything that could carry words. Some sang softly, broken versions of her songs. Others simply stood in silence, staring at the brick walls as though expecting her voice to pour out from an open window one last time. The news broadcasts were relentless. Images of Amy in her prime, eyes lined in thick black, hair towering, microphone clutched with both hands, flashed alongside photographs of her decline. Anchors spoke in hushed voices, but the tone was unmistakable. Another star had fallen. Another life had burned out before its time. They said her age again and again, 27, as if the number itself carried a sinister weight. Her body was taken away under flashing lights, but her ghost lingered. Fans wept openly. Neighbors recalled the sound of her laughter, echoing down the street at odd hours. Musicians flooded social media, stunned by the loss. Adele called her an inspiration. Lady Gaga admitted Amy had paved the way for artists who didn't fit the mold. Tony Bennett, who had sung beside her not long before, said she was one of the truest jazz singers he had ever known. But beneath the tributes lay questions. Questions that were not easily silenced. Why was Amy alone that night? Why had no one intervened in the final hours? What role did her management, her friends, her family play in the silence that allowed her to drink herself into oblivion? Reports clashed. Some claimed she had been trying to stay sober, that she had refused alcohol for weeks before a final relapse. Others whispered she had been left unsupervised, her bodyguard the only witness to her collapse. The official inquest revealed a staggering truth. Her blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. A lethal amount. The coroner's verdict: death by misadventure. An accidental overdose of alcohol. The simplest explanation for a life that was anything but simple. Yet for many, the verdict raised more questions than it answered. Was it really an accident? Or was it the culmination of years of neglect, exploitation, and silent suffering? The press dissected every detail of her final day. Reports emerged of her playing drums in her bedroom, watching videos of herself online, even speaking cheerfully to friends. A photograph taken just hours before her death showed her at a window, pale but smiling faintly, a cigarette between her fingers. To some, it looked like resignation. To others, it looked like peace. But the mysteries deepened when whispers of conspiracy began to circulate. Some insisted Amy had been clean for weeks, that her sudden binge made little sense. Others pointed to her on-again, off-again relationship with Blake Fielder Civil. the man many blamed for introducing her to the darkest corners of addiction. Though he was not present in her final days, his ghost hung heavy over the story, a reminder of the love that had both inspired and destroyed her. And then there was the 27 Club, the haunting roll call of names Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison. Cobain suddenly had a new member. Fans asked the same chilling question. Was Amy's death coincidence, or was it fate? Had she been doomed the moment she turned 27, cursed to repeat history's pattern? Documentaries, articles, podcasts all rushed to frame her story. Some painted her as a victim, others as a reckless artist undone by her own demons. Few captured the truth, that she was both, that her brilliance and her destruction were inseparable. Two halves of the same soul. Her parents became reluctant figures in the aftermath. Mitch Winehouse spoke publicly, promising to honor his daughter's legacy through a foundation aimed at helping young people fight addiction. Critics accused him of exploiting her memory, of seeking the spotlight she once hated. The debates raged. Who had truly loved Amy, and who had only loved what she could provide? But while the world argued, the music endured. Back to Black surged once more to the top of the charts. Streams of her songs skyrocketed. Fans clung to her voice, replaying the same notes over and over, as though listening might rewrite the ending. At her funeral, silence gave way to sobs as mourners gathered to say goodbye. She was laid to rest in North London, near her beloved grandmother Cynthia, whose loss Amy had never fully recovered from. The mourners sang Jewish prayers, their voices breaking. Among the crowd were famous faces and ordinary fans, united in grief. And yet, the funeral did not feel like closure. It felt like a pause, a comma in a story that refused to end, because Amy Winehouse did not simply die. She left behind a void, a question mark, a mystery that still lingers in every cigarette smoke memory, every half-empty bottle, every lyric that sounds now like a prophecy. The years that followed Amy Winehouse's death were heavy with silence. But silence does not always mean peace. It means echoes. It means unfinished sentences. It means questions whispered in the dark. Camden never forgot her. The pub she once haunted, the tiny venues where she tested songs that would later win Grammys, the brick walls she leaned against in cigarette smoke, all of it became sacred ground. Tourists began to wander through the neighborhood, searching for fragments of Amy's life, like pilgrims chasing relics. Murals appeared, painted on walls and shutters. Her wide eyes, her beehive hair, her defiant gaze. Camden had always been a place of music, but now it carried her ghost like a crown. The Amy Winehouse Foundation emerged as her family's attempt to shape a legacy beyond tragedy. It offered support to young people struggling with addiction and tried to give hope where Amy had been denied it. To some, it was a noble tribute. To others, it was an uncomfortable reminder of what could have been done sooner, of what was ignored until it was too late. Even in death, Amy's story carried controversy. Her father, Mish, in particular, became a polarizing figure. He gave interviews, wrote books, appeared in documentaries. He swore it was love. Critics swore it was profit. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Love had been there, yes, but so had control, so had denial. Amy herself once sang, "Daddy says I'm fine." The words ring differently now, like an accusation wrapped in melody. But the heart of Amy's legacy was not in foundations or arguments. It was in her music. Songs like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Tears Dry on Their Own, Love is a Losing Game. These were not just hits. They were confessions, journal entries sung aloud, heartbreak bottled into sound. Listening to them after her death feels different, like decoding messages from the other side. Every line seems weighted with foreshadowing, every chorus a warning no one heeded. And it wasn't just the lyrics. It was the voice. That smoky, aching, elastic voice that seemed too old for her years. Tony Bennett once said she was on the level of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. He was right. She carried the same depth, the same unteachable truth in every note. She didn't sing songs, she bled them. That's why they still cut deep today, years after the night she left Camden for the last time. But in every tribute, in every glowing review, one shadow always looms. The 27 Club, Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, Cobain, and now Winehouse. Brilliant, troubled souls, each extinguished at the same age. Some call it coincidence. Statisticians dismiss it as a myth. But myths persist for a reason. They explain what numbers cannot. They give shape to mysteries that refuse to die. Why 27? Why does the wheel stop there, over and over, for those who seem too bright, too fragile for this world? Is it fate? Is it a curse? Or is it the cruel combination of fame, addiction, and vulnerability, converging like a storm at the same fragile point in life? Amy's teenage years were a collision of contradictions. On one hand, she was still just a girl with homework stuffed into her bag, laughing with friends, wandering through the streets of Southgate. On the other, she was already a voice too big for classrooms, too raw for polite company. At school, she was restless, often disruptive, a spark that couldn't be contained by structure. Teachers grew exasperated, but even they admitted there was brilliance beneath the chaos. She sang in assemblies, scribbled lyrics in margins, always reaching for something beyond her small corner of London. Her parents had divorced when she was 9, and though they both loved her, the absence of stability left an invisible bruise. Amy learned early to take comfort in music, to drown out loneliness with the crackle of jazz records and the sound of her own voice echoing against her bedroom walls. Friends noticed she seemed older than she was, her humor sharp, her sarcasm biting, her laughter sometimes masking a heaviness they couldn't name. By her mid-teens, Amy had begun sneaking into clubs. London's underground music scene was electric at the time, tiny venues hidden behind unmarked doors, smoky basements where jazz still thrived in secret, and small stages that felt like sanctuaries for those who didn't fit the mainstream mold. Amy fit right in. She was bold enough to push her way through, confident enough to grab a microphone when no one expected it, and talented enough to silence a room within seconds. Thought it wasn't polished. It wasn't supposed to be. Her voice cracked sometimes. Her timing wasn't perfect, but that was the magic. She sang as though her life depended on it, pouring every ache and every unspoken thought into the air. People leaned in, caught between awe and disbelief. How could such a young girl carry so much soul? Around this time, Amy was accepted into the Sylvia Young Theatre School, a place designed for gifted performers. For a while, it seemed she had found her path. But rules were never her friend. She clashed with authority, pushed boundaries, and eventually was expelled. In interviews years later, she would laugh about it, calling herself a troublemaker. But beneath the bravado, there was always that thread of rebellion, a refusal to be caged, even when the cage was meant to nurture her. But the industry was watching. Word spread about the girl with the smoky voice and the attitude to match. A friend passed along a recording of Amy singing to a talent scout. The tape was rough, unrefined, but it carried the unmistakable weight of someone who couldn't be ignored. Meetings followed, contracts were discussed, and Amy, barely out of her teens, found herself pulled into the machinery of music. At 19, she signed her first major deal. The transition was sudden, jarring. One day, she was scribbling songs in her diary. The next, she was in polished studios, producers and executives hovering, eager to shape her into something marketable. But Amy was never interested in being shaped. She argued, resisted, and demanded control. She didn't want to sing someone else's words and didn't want to sound like anyone else. Her voice was her own, and she guarded it fiercely. The sessions that followed were tense, but the results were undeniable. Her debut album, Frank, was born out of those clashes, a record that was equal parts jazz, soul, and confessional diary. Released in 2003, it was raw, witty, and brutally honest. Critics praised it, listeners connected to it, and suddenly Amy Winehouse was no longer a hidden gem in smoky clubs. She was on the radio, in magazines, on stages she had once only dreamed of, but success didn't soothe her. If anything, it fueled the storm inside. The spotlight was harsh, the scrutiny relentless. Amy's sharp tongue made headlines. Her refusal to play nice made her both admired and criticized. She was authentic to the bone, but authenticity comes at a cost in an industry built on polish and illusion. And in the shadows of her rise, another story was beginning. Amy had started experimenting first with alcohol, then with drugs. At first, it seemed like part of the scene, the casual indulgence of youth. But for Amy, substances weren't just recreation. They were armor, a way to silence the noise in her head, a way to escape the ache that never seemed to leave her. Friends noticed the changes, the late nights that stretched into mornings, the missed calls, the slurred laughter. They worried, but Amy brushed them off with a grin and a joke. The duality of her life grew sharper. On stage, she was mesmerizing, her voice deep and powerful, her presence magnetic. Off stage, she was slipping, her mood swinging, her relationships fracturing. Her family tried to help, but Amy was headstrong, refusing to be told what to do. She was already building the myth of Amy Winehouse, the woman who sang with the pain of generations, the woman who burned too brightly to ever dim quietly. The press took notice too. Tabloids circled, sensing drama, sensing profit. They photographed her stumbles, twisted her words, and turned her struggles into entertainment. For Amy, it was suffocating. She wanted the music, not the circus. But the two were now inseparable. By the mid-2000s, she was preparing her second album. What she didn't know, what no one around her fully realized, was that this record would change everything. It would catapult her from promising artist to international sensation. But it would also set her on a collision course with fame, addiction, and tragedy. Because in crafting Back to Black, Amy wasn't just writing songs. She was tearing open her chest, exposing every wound, every heartbreak, every self-destructive impulse. The world would hear it, adore it, and feed it back to her in ways she wasn't ready to face. And waiting in the wings was a man who would become both her great love and her greatest undoing. His name was Blake Fielder Civil. Their paths were about to cross, and once they did, nothing in Amy's life would ever be the same again. Blake appeared in Amy's world like a spark in dry grass suddenly, dangerous, impossible to ignore. They met in a Camden pub, a place buzzing with loud music, cheap drinks, and the restless energy of London's nightlife. Amy, already growing in fame, could have brushed him off, could have let the encounter fade into memory. But there was something magnetic about him, something raw and broken that matched the chaos she carried within. He wasn't polished or safe. He wasn't the kind of man parents hoped for, or the kind of partner who would steady her path. But that was the appeal. Blake was reckless, unpredictable, and alive in a way that mirrored Amy's own fire. Their attraction was instant, combustible. Within days, they were inseparable, drinking together, laughing too loudly, carving their own orbit. Friends noticed the change immediately. Amy glowed when Blake was near, her sharp edges softening, her laughter more genuine. But alongside the glow was danger. Blake introduced her to darker indulgences, pulling her deeper into a world of heavy drinking and drugs. What began as experiments became patterns. What began as fun became needed. At the same time, Amy was writing. Heartbreak, longing, self-destruction, all of it poured into her lyrics. When Blake drifted in and out of her life, when he betrayed her, when he left her aching and desperate, she didn't bury the pain. She immortalized it in song. Out of that storm came Back to Black, an album that would define her career and seal her legend. Recording the album was both catharsis and torment. Producers marveled at her ability to step into the booth and deliver takes soaked in emotion, her voice trembling with authenticity. She wasn't performing. She was bleeding. Songs like Love is a Losing Game and Tears Dry on Their Own weren't abstract. They were her diary, her confession, her truth. When Back to Black was released in 2006, the world took notice. The record exploded across charts, earning critical acclaim and commercial success. Amy became a global star almost overnight, her beehive hair and winged eyeliner instantly iconic. The public adored her, the industry celebrated her, and award shows showered her with nominations. But behind the glitter was rot. Fame amplified everything: the pressure, the scrutiny, the temptations. Paparazzi hounded her daily, capturing her at her worst, feeding tabloids with images of her stumbling, slurring, fighting. They turned her life into a spectacle, every mistake magnified, every slip immortalized in headlines. Amy fought back the only way she knew, by embracing the chaos. She leaned into her image as the rebellious starlet, the girl who wouldn't conform, the woman who told the truth even when it was ugly. But the cost was steep. Her health deteriorated, her relationships strained, and her artistry became entwined with her addictions. Her parents worried, her friends intervened, but Amy resisted every attempt to pull her back. She wasn't ready to be saved, perhaps didn't believe she could be. And Blake, the love she couldn't quit, remained at the center of the storm. Their relationship was toxic, a cycle of passion and destruction, fights and reconciliations, drugs and promises. They married in 2007, a decision that seemed less like celebration and more like surrender to the inevitable spiral. Meanwhile, the world kept applauding. At the 2008 Grammy Awards, Amy won 5 trophies, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year. Standing on stage, she looked both triumphant and fragile, her voice trembling as she thanked those who believed in her. Millions watched, but few realized they were witnessing the height of her success and the beginning of her irreversible decline. Because, while Amy was conquering the world was also consuming her. Paparazzi cameras didn't just capture her image. They stole her privacy, her peace, her chance at recovery. Every step she took outside became a headline, every stew. The night Amy stood on the Grammy stage in 2008 should have been a victory without shadows. 5 golden trophies gleamed in her hands, proof that her raw honesty, her aching voice, her refusal to be anything but herself had conquered the music world. Millions watched her smile, her eyes darting nervously under the lights, her hands shaking as though she knew the moment was too fragile to last. She thanked her parents, her band, her fans. She even managed a nervous laugh. The crowd roared, unaware that beneath the applause, her world was crumbling dot, because behind the stage, beyond the glitter, Amy was already fading. That night, while the industry crowned her their queen, whispers spread about her condition. Her voice had wavered during rehearsals. Her skin was pale, her frame thinner than ever. Her health had become a question mark hanging in the air, a question nobody dared ask directly, but everyone knew the answer to. The Grammys weren't salvation. They were a spotlight that exposed the cracks. Success had never been the cure for Amy. If anything, it magnified her demons. The more the world adored her, the more she recoiled, retreating into drink and drugs, into Blake's toxic orbit, into the blur of nights that bled into days. Blake himself was absent that night, imprisoned on charges of assault and obstruction of justice. Yet his absence didn't erase him. Amy still wore his shadow like a second skin. Every acceptance speech, every photograph, every song seemed haunted by him. To love Blake was to court ruin, and Amy knew it. But she couldn't let him go. Their bond was a chain heavy, unbreakable, forged in equal parts passion and destruction. Her family begged her to walk away. Managers tried to intervene. Friends staged interventions that ended in shouting matches and slammed doors. Amy resisted them all. She didn't want to be someone else's project, didn't want to be saved against her will. She wanted Blake. She wanted the rush. She wanted the escape that substances promised. And so the cycle continued. The tabloids feasted. Every stumble on a late-night street became front-page news. Photographers camped outside her Camden home, waiting for the slightest misstep. They captured her gaunt figure, her smeared makeup, her bruises, her vacant stares. The headlines were merciless. Amy's collapse. Winehouse wasted again. From star to shambles, what had begun as admiration turned into voyeurism. The public devouring her downfall as eagerly as they once devoured her music. And yet, when she did perform, when she managed to drag herself on stage, something miraculous still happened. Her voice, though fragile, still carried that ache, that timeless weight. Audiences cheered, clung to the hope that the Amy they loved was still there, fighting beneath the chaos. But those moments grew rarer, replaced by canceled shows, slurred sets, and angry crowds who didn't understand they weren't watching a performance, they were watching a woman drowning in front of them. In the summer of 2008, Amy was rushed to the hospital after collapsing at home. Doctors warned her family that her body was giving up, ravaged by years of abuse. She was diagnosed with emphysema, her lungs already failing at 24. For most people, such news would be a wake-up call. For Amy, it was another reminder of how far she had already fallen. Yet she laughed it off publicly, brushing aside the seriousness with a shrug and a cigarette dangling from her fingers. She wasn't ready to admit defeat, not to herself, not to the world. But behind the laughter was fear she couldn't face. Blake's release from prison reignited the cycle. Their reunions were volatile, filled with passion and violence, declarations of love followed by nights of destruction. Friends called it codependence. Amy called it devotion. Whatever the word, it was killing her. Meanwhile, the pressure to follow Back to Black mounted. The industry wanted more hits, more albums, more of the brilliance that had made her a star. But Amy couldn't deliver. The songs wouldn't come. The sessions collapsed, and every delay deepened the disappointment. The girl who had once written songs in her bedroom, pouring herself onto the page, now sat in sterile studios, unable to find the voice that had carried her this far. It wasn't that the music had left her. It was that the noise, the drugs, the fame, the cameras, the chaos drowned it out. As 2009 arrived, Amy retreated further, spending months in and out of hospitals, rehab clinics, and courtrooms. Her father, Mitch, became a constant presence, alternately defending her in the press and pushing her toward treatment. Their relationship, already complicated, grew strained. Amy resented his interventions, resented the way her private pain became public fodder. Her mother, Janice, watched helplessly as her daughter slipped further away. Friends who had known Amy before the fame said she was no longer the same person. The quick wit, the mischievous sparkle still surfaced, but only in flashes. Most of the time, she was distant, lost, unreachable. The story of Amy Winehouse was turning darker, the arc bending toward inevitability. The girl who had once been destined for greatness was now destined for tragedy. And though those around her tried to pull her back, the current was too strong. By the end of 2009, Amy stood at a crossroads. The world still adored her, still begged for her music, still hoped for a comeback. But inside, Amy was fractured, torn between the love that destroyed her, the substances that numbed her, and the fame that suffocated her. Amy herself once joked about it, brushing off the idea of the 27 Club with a laugh. But the laugh feels hollow now, an echo bouncing back from a future she couldn't escape. In the years since, documentaries have tried to tell her story. Some focus on the brilliance, others on the chaos. The most haunting ones are those that simply let Amy speak through home videos, unreleased recordings, scribbled notes. In those glimpses, you see not a myth, not a tragedy, but a girl. A girl who loved to laugh, who adored her grandmother, who doodled in notebooks, who wanted love more than anything. A girl crushed beneath the weight of being an icon before she was ready to carry a dot. And so, her story is unfinished. Not because we don't know how it ended, we do. All too clearly, but because we will never stop asking why. Why didn't someone save her? Why didn't the world protect her? Why was her pain entertainment instead of an alarm? The truth is, Amy Winehouse was not just a victim of her own demons. She was a victim of ours of a culture that devours artists, demands their souls in exchange for applause, then turns their collapse into headlines. She once sang, "They tried to make me go to rehab. I said no, no." The world sang along, smiling at her defiance. But behind the catchy chorus was a cry for help. We all heard it. We all ignored it. Now, more than a decade later, Amy's voice still floats through radios, playlists, smoky bars at closing time. It feels alive, urgent, as though she's still here. That is the strange magic of music. It makes ghosts eternal. But when the song ends, the silence returns. And in that silence lies the real mystery. Was Amy Winehouse destined to burn out? Her brilliance too volatile to last? Or was she stolen, piece by piece, by the pressures of fame and the failures of those closest to her? No answer is satisfying. None will bring her back. But perhaps that is the shape of this story, not resolution, but haunting, because Amy Winehouse's tale does not close neatly. It lingers, it unsettles, it whispers questions we cannot silence. She is forever 27, forever singing into a microphone that now stands empty, forever caught between genius and tragedy. And so we leave her there, in the half-light between music and mystery. A woman whose songs were warnings, whose life was a riddle, whose death was an echo. The curtain falls. The stage is dark. The world is quiet. But somewhere, if you listen closely, you can still hear her voice aching, defiant, alive. And perhaps that is the real mystery. Amy Winehouse is gone, but she never truly left.